Thank y'all for being here. So we're going to talk a little bit about human trafficking today. Full disclosure, I think y'all are like the biggest group that I've presented in front of. So like I'm a little bit nervous, but I'll get through it. To be honest, I can't remember if I sent my slides in. So just in case, if you want, this QR code will take you directly to these slides. So if anybody likes to follow along, if they can't see very well and they need to follow along on their phone, or you just want to have them for later on, scan this. It'll take you directly to my, the public link so you can follow along. I'll give y'all a couple seconds.
No, it won't scan.
It won't scan? You might have to get a little bit more in front. And I can come back to it at the end when we finish up, and I'll just leave it up there for y'all, so if anybody needs to come back to it. Okay. All right, so just a little bit about me. My name is Kylie Earp, not related to Wyatt Earp. There's not an A in my name, but I do get that. Yeah, no, that would be really cool, especially because I work for a law enforcement agency, so that would be awesome. And I'm also from Texas. You will hear me say y'all a lot. I'm pretty sure you could probably make a water drinking game out of how many times I end up saying it at the end of this. So just full disclosure, because you'll hear that quite often. But yeah, so I'm from Texas. I worked for Child Protective Services before I moved up here to Montana. I did it for 7 years. I worked as an investigations supervisor and something called an alternative response supervisor down in Lubbock and Houston. So I worked in very large areas. I tell you that because down in Texas, it's different than up here in Montana because we actually could investigate, and we had part of the child abuse neglect definitions of child trafficking, specifically child labor trafficking and child sex trafficking. So we had cases that we would get called into our units for those. Didn't see them often, but I felt like I had a pretty good understanding of what human trafficking was because that was a part of our abuse and neglect definitions. So I came up here to Montana. I'm sorry, I didn't come up here because of Yellowstone, I promise. But I now work for Montana's Department of Justice. It's a very long title because there's a lot of different umbrellas under the DOJ. But I work as under the Montana Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigations, Narcotics Bureau, Human Trafficking Unit. I'm their victim service specialist, so I'm actually the only non-sworn agent in my unit and in my bureau. So I'm not law enforcement. I'm actually a candidacy for my social work licensure right now. But I work in a unit of 3 agents. One of those is a supervisory agent. How many of you in here knew that Montana had a human trafficking unit? Okay, so a good amount of y'all. So it's been around for a few years. It started out with 2 agents. Now we have 3. We need 10. And we'll talk more about why here in a little bit. But we've got Agent Andy Yednock, not Yedinak, but I love it when people do that. But it's Yednock. Agent Bethany Richter down here, she covers the entire east side of Montana. And Agent Michael Mertz, and he covers the southwestern parts of Montana. And I show this to you because I don't know if everybody in here is from Helena, but if you are from other parts of Montana, if you see your county with the corresponding agent, that's who would be responding to human trafficking cases in your area. So, actually, no, I don't want y'all to see that yet. So when I say the word human trafficking, and just a heads up, this goes a lot better when there's responses and feedback. So I will ask y'all questions and I'll sit here in silence with you until someone responds. So it just helps make it go a little bit better. I also want to know from y'all what you know about human trafficking, and it just makes things go a little bit smoother. So when I say human trafficking, what do you think of? What's the first thing that pops into your mind?
White vans.
What was it?
White vans.
White vans? Yes, yeah. What else? Children? Okay. Women being trafficked like sex slavery? Okay, yeah.
I think of reservations and kids being taken off of those, because I'm from kind of the Highline area, and it's just the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So think of non-English speakers as victims.
Non-English speakers as victims? Yep. So, okay. I thought I saw a hand over here. So I'm going to be completely honest. Before I started with this unit, I thought of the movie Taken. Who else thinks of that movie? Yeah. You're not wrong, because that's one of the most well-known things out there when we talk about human trafficking. It's one of the most well-known medias out there when it comes to that topic. So Taken is one of the things that we think about. We think about women who are trafficked across countries, being beaten, tortured, chained, held against their will, drugged. So we think about all those different types of things. Also Liam Neeson. Unfortunately, we don't have Liam Neeson. I mean, these guys are pretty awesome, but they're not quite Liam Neeson. So human trafficking is compelling or coercing another person's labor or services, including commercial sex acts. The coercion can be subtle or overt, and it can be physical or psychological. Can anyone tell me what commercial sex acts are? Prostitution, okay. What is prostitution?
Paying for sex.
Yep, both of y'all. Paying for sex, money. Is that what you said?
Yeah, sex for money.
Sex for money, right.
Or drugs.
Or drugs, there we go. Yeah, so when we talk about commercial sex acts, a commercial sex act is giving or receiving of anything of value to a person in exchange for a sex act. So a lot of the times we are thinking about sex for money. However, when it comes to commercial sex acts, and when we're looking at human trafficking, it can be anything of value. So it could be sex being sold for drugs, jewelry, clothes, rent, bills, a place to stay for the night, an Uber ride. It can be anything of value to that person. So just kind of keep that in mind as we talk about, especially when we talk about sex trafficking, that anything of value can be exchanged. And when we're talking about coercion, these are types of things that we are looking at. This top one, the use or threat of force against abduction of, serious harm to, or physical restraints of a person. That's the one that most people are thinking of when we say human trafficking. They're thinking about those who are being taken against their will, being put into a white van, being held in the house, chained up, being drugged, beaten, and forced into that life, physically forced into that life. There's the use of a plan, pattern, or statement with intent to cause a person to believe that failure to perform an act, and I'm not reading this off to y'all because I don't think you can't read. I'm reading it for those in the back, just in case you can't read it. An act will result in the use of force against, abduction of, serious harm to, or physical restraint of a person. The abuse or threatened abuse of law or legal process. We see this a lot with both labor trafficking and sex trafficking, especially those who are undocumented, and for those who are engaged in commercial sex acts. Controlling or threatening to control a person's access to any substance. The actual or threatened destruction of taking a person's identification document or other property. The use of debt bondage, and we'll talk about that when we get into labor trafficking. The use of person's physical or mental impairment, when the impairment has substantial adverse effect on the person's cognitive or volitional function. And then the commission of civil or criminal fraud. And also, if y'all have questions as we go along, please feel free to raise your hand, because I prefer to answer them as we go. But you can also ask at the end too. I'm going to kind of go through these pretty quickly because Montana laws are just boring. I'm sorry. They're just not fun to talk about. But they're good to know. They're really good to know and kind of to see what we're doing here in Montana to combat trafficking. So we've got patronizing a prostitute. Just for those, because I've seen some confusion on this, when we're talking about patronizing a prostitute, patronizing is those who are buying. Okay, so we're not talking about the person who is selling. We are talking about the buyer. So if you are buying like someone who is selling sex, The first offense is up to 5 years. Subsequent offense is up to 10 years. And then if the person patronized was under the age of 18, and this is across all laws pertaining to children, it's a 100-year sentence mandatory with a minimum of 25 years. And that means at 25, they get 25 years no matter what. Nothing can be touched at 25 years, and then after 25 years, they can look at parole. And then for sex trafficking, it's 2 to 20 years. Labor trafficking is 15 years. Our labor trafficking law is pretty new. We didn't have that one before. And then patronizing a victim of sex trafficking is different than patronizing a prostitute. This has to show that the person who was buying knew or had to known that that person was being trafficked. Aggravated sex trafficking, this pertains to if there's someone who is recruiting, so a trafficker is recruiting a person from a place like a homeless center or a DV shelter, a place that provides service to those who are a domestic violence victim or a human trafficking victim or a sexual assault victim. They would be charged under the aggravated sex trafficking law. And then there's the child sex trafficking, which is a 100-year sentence, mandatory minimum of 25 years. And we also have, I think, one of the strictest laws when it comes to the children's sex trafficking laws in the country. I think Texas is the first one. And oftentimes we end up charging statewide versus federal because our laws are heavier and heftier at the state level versus federal.
So is that per violation, or per violation? So if someone, 6 kids would mean, 25 years, 6 times,
Yeah, they'd be in there for a long
50
time.
years.
Yeah, they'd be in there for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah. So here are some myths about human trafficking, because we're going to talk about some of these as we go. So the main form of human trafficking is sex trafficking. Whenever we talk about it, and I catch this all the time, and I used to do this myself, when I say human trafficking, people will automatically start talking about sex trafficking. Or when we say the word human trafficking, the first thing we think about is sex trafficking. That's not true. Labor trafficking is also under that. In fact, labor trafficking is a lot more dominant. Like, we see a lot more of it. There's a lot more of that going on than there is sex trafficking. Trafficking is primarily done through kidnapping and physical force into the life. Traffickers are typically strangers. Not always. When we're talking about those who are like kidnapping them, taking them, putting them in a van, holding against their will, that does happen. That's not what we normally see, though. Normally what we see are those who are boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, aunts, uncles, a good friend, landlord. So it's people that they know. People that they love, people that they have a relationship with or care about. It only occurs in large cities and foreign countries. Again, no. We've had some of our smallest towns in Montana have cases. You don't hear about them because people are still getting educated and aware of what human trafficking looks like. So it just doesn't get reported. But we do have them in these small towns. So don't think that if you are in Circle, Montana, that it doesn't happen in Circle, Montana, because it absolutely does. You're not going to have as many cases as you are like in Houston or in Billings, but they're still there. Victims self-identify and will try to seek help when in public. Not always true. In fact, most victims don't identify as victims. They don't even think what's happening to them is, I wouldn't say not wrong, but they don't think that it's trafficking. Victims are only non-U.S. citizens and those who are living in poverty, and trafficking and smuggling are the same thing. So, just real quick, the difference between trafficking and smuggling, because people use these things, will intertwine those two words together, and they are not the same thing. You'll get a very different response if you report smuggling when you mean trafficking. So trafficking is involuntary. It's a crime against a person. It's exploitation-based. Borders do not have to be crossed. A person can be from Montana, always lived in Montana, and be trafficked in Montana. Foreign nationals and citizens, so both can happen. Whereas smuggling is voluntary, It's a crime against the state. You can't smuggle a U.S. citizen back into the country. Transportation-based, it requires border crossing, and it's foreign nationals. But they're both lucrative, illicit, organized criminal networks. So those are the things that are similar. We do have cases where someone is being trafficked and has been smuggled into the country. They were smuggled in and led to like false pretenses about what they would be doing when they got here. But it's not the same thing. It's a different crime. So between the years of 2007 and 2016, Polaris analyzed 32,000 cases of human trafficking. When they did this, they identified 25 types of human trafficking in the United States. And here they are. So these are the faces of human trafficking. These are the kinds of cases that we see here in Montana. Not all of them are here. We might see one or two, like carnivals. Do we have carnivals here in Montana? We do? Oh, okay, I just not seen one. So carnivals, maybe we won't see those as often, but we might see a lot of construction, outdoor solicitation, escort services, illicit massage businesses. There's been some in the news recently that y'all might have seen. So those are ones that we do see a lot here in Montana. So there's going to be some here that you see more of than others. So there's currently over 1 million victims of human trafficking in the United States. And I believe over 50 million in the across the globe. So why is it growing? Human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal business in the world, according to the State Department. It ranks only second to drug trafficking, and it continues to climb. We would not be surprised to see this outrank drug trafficking here in the next 5 to 10 years, if not quicker than that. It is estimated to bring in $150 billion annually. So that's just a little bit under Microsoft and what Microsoft brings in. Human trafficking is an endless profit margin. Humans can be sold over and over and over again, whereas while drugs can only be sold once. All right, so you have somebody who is a drug dealer here in Montana. Maybe they're not a great drug dealer because they skim off the top of their supply. And then they sell what they've got left in their supply, and that's it. That's all they have. Then they have to go back to their supplier and get more. Whereas with human trafficking, you have one person that you are selling. You can sell them over and over and over again. You can sell them 10 to 20 times in one day, and then the next day, and then the next day. So can we see how that would end up increasing profits and would probably eventually outrank drug trafficking? The average price for a gram of meth in Montana is $70, where the average price for time with the victim is $150, and that can vary depending on the city. But for on average across the state, it's about $150. It varies based on city and what types of acts that they are offering. So it's the fastest growing business. The majority of those trafficked are young adults. They're usually between the ages of 14 and 24. However, that is not, that's not the only age group that we see. There have been kids that we've seen that have been as young as 10 being trafficked, and they're probably younger than that. And then as old as 60, and there's 64, I think, is the oldest we've seen. So it can range in those ages. I've seen quite a few who are in between the ages of 30 and 40, but on average we see here in Montana between 14 and 24. And almost all have experienced either sexual exploitation, violence, or forced drug use during their time of being enslaved. So these are the trends of cases that we see here in Montana. There's travelers. So those are the ones who are going from state to state. They might be from Montana, but they are being moved from, I should probably put a lid on that. They're being moved from state to state. They might stay in an area for just a day or two. So be in Seattle, They'll travel through what's that interstate that goes like through Bozeman and Billings? I-90? Okay. Yeah, so they'll travel across I-90, go through like Bozeman, might stay for a couple nights there, move on to the next place, stay for a couple nights there. Then they go down south, down towards Texas. So we see a lot of that happening. And they do that because it is hard to catch someone and hard to intervene and recover someone who is consistently moving, because you are having to work with multiple jurisdictions, including federal. I don't know how many of you have ever had to work with a federal agency, but it can be a headache. So they're great people in case they do see this recording, though. They're wonderful. Or my boss sees this. There's also locals. So like I had talked about earlier, locals are people who are from Montana. They were born here, never left Montana, grown up here, and they are being trafficked in Montana and never leave the state of Montana. They stay here and they're trafficked here by their traffickers. There's massage parlors. We see a lot of those. Those are probably one of the most talked about types of trafficking cases that we see here in Montana. There are in every major city, town. Y'all don't have cities here, y'all have towns. It's not like Dallas or Houston. But it's like in every major large town here in Montana, you will see quite a few. Labor trafficking, that one's a big one. We see a lot of labor trafficking cases here in Montana. And house trafficking, actually that one shouldn't really be here. It's like one that we see often in Montana. That one you will see in other states that have those larger cities, like the larger metropolitan areas. House trafficking is like kind of what you're thinking about when we're talking about taken. For commercial sex trafficking stats, 3 and 4 adult prostitutes were introduced into this sex trade as minors. And I need to take that word out. I'm not a fan of that, and we are actually trying to get that changed in our legislation to different wording. But that is what is in our legal code right now when we're talking about those who are selling sex. But 3 and 4 adult prostitutes were introduced into sex trade as minors. 1 in 3 minors living on the streets will have an attempt to be lured in within 48 hours. So when we see like those who are a part of the child welfare system and they're running away, within 48 hours, that doesn't mean someone is pulling up next to them with a car saying, get in. It's people that are saying, hey, you look like you're cold. You wanna come hang out with me? I've got a place to stay. That's what I'm talking about when we're referring to like being lured in. Average age of minors involved are 14 years of age. And then when we talk about traffickers, pimps, they can profit in excess of $100,000 per year with one victim, and on average we see them have about 3. And they're not always with their victims either. Sometimes they will send them with another girl, like their most trusted one, and stay in their own city, state, and have them traveling around, and they'll have multiple throughout the country. So when we're talking about factors in recruitment, they will target their vulnerabilities. So sex traffickers will find someone who has a list of vulnerabilities or a vulnerability that they feel like they can target and exploit. So those who are runaways, homeless, they'll target those, and then they'll exploit their needs. They'll provide for those basic needs through attention, flattery, money, drugs, alcohol, and then they'll demand payback or facilitate sexual tryouts with them. And then they will give them affection, convince them of their love, and then exploit those insecurities. So that's where you see a lot of those people who are their boyfriends, or like the victims will say that that's my boyfriend, he loves me, or that's my husband, we got married, like he cares for me, he would never do this to me. They build this trauma bond, the traffickers will build this trauma bond with their victims, and it keeps them entangled. So where does recruitment happen? A lot of times we see it within families. Malls, I know that there's not really many left in Montana, but that's still a place where a lot of young adults can go hang out, or kids. House parties, churches, schools, social events. Does this have a, there we go. Social media. That's a major one that we're seeing a lot of. How many of you in here have kids? Okay. How many of them have Snapchat? It's okay, I won't judge you. I had Snapchat when I was like 14, so. How many of them have Instagram or TikTok? Okay. Those are some of the places that are being, did someone just pull out a little pointer? So those are that's one of the biggest major places that we are seeing where kids are being recruited because people are going online, finding their public profiles and luring them in through their DMs. Sometimes they will present themselves as younger. Sometimes they'll present them just as the age that they are. And these are just some of the vulnerabilities that I was talking about. This is a list of like the most common ones, but this does not entail all of them. So those who are unhoused, runaways, children in the welfare system, people with disabilities, like mental health and or physical, the LGBTQIA individuals, undocumented immigrants, especially when we're looking at labor trafficking, American Indians, Alaskan Natives, those who are struggling with substance use and self-esteem issues is a big one. We will also see a lot of times where traffickers will find and narrow in on someone who has got a compounded vulnerabilities. So they will have multiple, especially mental health disabilities and substance use, and those who are in poverty, living in poverty, because those are ones that they can easily attach to and meet those basic needs for them and make them feel like they're the only person that individual can rely on. So we'll see a lot of that too. But really, vulnerabilities, anybody can have a vulnerability that can be exploited. So this ensures control and it creates dependency. Force, fraud, and coercion is something we talk a lot about with human trafficking. These are the things that traffickers will use to keep a person under their wing, keep them entangled in their web. So like with force, they'll use physical violence, beatings, torture can happen. They'll use confinement, starvation, they'll sexually assault them and rape them. They'll use emotional abuse. Fraud, they'll use false job. I think that's a typo. I don't know what I meant there. Love, marriage promises. Oh, no, sorry, yes, false job is the right one. So like promising someone who is coming to this country that they are going to work this great job, make a lot of money, and then they get here and they are now in debt, living in a place that's the size of a closet. Coercion, they'll use threats to their victim and loved ones. So what we'll see a lot of is when we're talking about victims who are being trafficked, and they are out and about. Some of them will be they will be going to work, they will be going to school. At the grocery store, their trafficker is not standing right by them at all. But they're still being trafficked because their trafficker uses things like, if you tell anyone what I'm doing, if you tell anyone about what's happening here, I will get your sister next and bring her into this. If you leave me, your sister, your brother is going to be filling your spot. We see a lot of victims that deal with that. They'll tell them, if you were to tell anyone, if you report to law enforcement, if you were to leave, I will hurt your family. I know where you live, especially because I took your ID. I know where you stay at. I know where your family stays at. I will go there and I will hurt them and kill them. So they will use those types of threats to keep people in that life with them. They'll use debt, blackmail, deportation. We'll see that quite often with those who are being labor trafficked and sex trafficked, because we see that with IMBs, illicit massage businesses. And they use fear. Fear is one of the biggest things that we see. Fear is a very, very strong and complex emotion, and that's something that they use against the victims. Causing fear, telling them that these things are going to happen to them or it's going to happen to their family, their friends, their loved ones, that they're going to be the ones that get arrested. And in a lot of places that does happen, they report and they're arrested. So they use fear to keep people staying in this life without having to ever touch them. Pimps. I usually go into a lot more detail over this because it's kind of interesting to learn more, but I will condense it down just for the matter of time. But there are different styles of pimps, okay? So we have got the Romeo pimp. That's what we see a lot of when we are talking about pimps here, especially here in Montana. Romeo pimps are those who are loving, romantic. They will groom their victims. They will use a lot of the coercion tactics. They don't use a lot of physical force, abuse to keep their victims in line. Because if somebody was to have injuries all over too, and we're talking about prostitution, especially if you watch shows like SVU, and those things still do happen. It still happens. There's still people. They're called streetwalkers. That's like the street term for it is streetwalkers. So we do still see that, not here in Montana anymore, or not as often. And the reason for that is because it is easier to post online and post ads online. There are also dozens, if not more, sites of places where you can just, if you were to go to Google and type in Montana escorts, you are going to get pages of ads, pages of web pages of places where people can post. And then it also allows for anonymity. I can't say that word. So if you think about it, if someone is to walk the street and be selling just straight from the street, they would be able to be easily identified, especially by law enforcement. Posting an ad, there are places where people are posting ads, and they do a lot of vetting before they will meet up with the buyer for their protection, also because of their trafficker. So these are the types of ads that we see. There's travelers, there's locals, and massage parlors. The travelers are like the ones that are moving around from state to state. The locals are like the ones I was talking about where they're from Montana and, posting here in Montana. With travelers, you might see them posting in Bozeman, then they post up in Kalispell, then they're posting an ad down in Billings. Your locals are usually just posting within, the local pages. And then the massage parlors, IMBs, the massage businesses. They, a lot of times, will make posts on some of these pages, the escort pages. So they will create ads on those pages. It's usually how they get kind of identified. So social media has become a huge platform. All of these different places are where recruiters can go to find someone that, they want to traffic. Tinder, OnlyFans, I've had several victims actually who have been recruited through Tinder. And again, it's not like they're being told to go on a date and now they're being thrown into a van. They go on a few dates. They present as someone that is genuinely wanting to get to know them, and then they groom them into that life. Facebook, Zoosk. I don't know what Zoosk is. That's actually my boss put that on there. So this was one of his slides. Snapchat, Whisper, Meet Me, TikTok. I've heard Roblox has been a big one recently too, the gaming. Anything where any child or any person can get on and has access to anyone outside of their home. So these are some things to look for. When we are talking about trafficking victims, a lot of times when they have been trafficked, they might have branding. They have tattoos. How many of you in here have tattoos? Okay. I know they don't always have to have a meaning, but if someone was to ask you about your tattoo, usually there's a story behind it, right? There's some kind of a story, there might be a meaning, or it just might be a funny story of how you got it, but there's something behind that tattoo that you would, have an explanation for. When we're talking with those who might be victims of trafficking, when they have tattoos, a lot of the times it is branding, not always, but a lot of times it is branding. It can be their trafficker's name. When we talk about trafficking, there's a lot of symbolism that's used in that world. The life is what they call it, or the game. A lot of times when we see money bags, money signs, kings, queens, crowns, those are big ones. Anything of value, representation of value, is something that we would see for those who might be getting branded. We see also roses, and emojis also on ads. Roses are a big one too. So like for example, up here, there's a money bag with a $sign tattoo. This picture, where am I not? Right here, she's got her trafficker's name tattooed on the inside of her lip. And these are not by their choice. This is their trafficker that's doing this. Right down here, you probably can't see it very well, especially those in the back, but it is her trafficker's initials with a king crown on top. Property of Matt. I don't know if anybody in here would get their spouse's name and property of spouse's name.
Is it spelled right?
I don't know. Property. It looks like it. There's the R right there. But it says property of Matt M., which was her trafficker. And it has a king's crown on top of it. So the king's and queen crown is representation of their trafficker being the king. The queen's crown is if there's someone who is a victim of trafficking and they have a queen's crown on them, it's usually indicative of them being the bottom. Has anyone ever heard of that term? Okay. So the bottom is the most trusted girl. She's usually the first one that the trafficker had recruited. She had started out being trafficked first, and then she became very trusted by the trafficker, and now she's the one doing a lot of the recruitment. We will a lot of times we will see the bottom will have the girls with them, because when you see two women together, it's not like two girls who are like in the car together, or they're the ones out and about in public, or they're posting. You're not really going to, like, the alarm bells aren't going to really be sounding off of that. Also, when you have a woman who comes up to you and you are a young girl, you're going to trust the woman a little bit more than if a random man comes up. Sorry, men. But you're going to probably trust the woman a little bit more than the man. So they will use that tactic of using their bottom to recruit young girls or young women. So this is the king and queen crown. So it's the trafficker and then his bottom. So with sex trafficking indicators, these are just going to be some of the things that you might see. And we're talking about, I don't know what job roles y'all all have here. So when I talk about these things, you may not see these in your specific job roles, but these are also things you might see out in public to kind of keep an eye on, or people in your life that you know. And also, just to keep in mind, when we are talking about these red flags and indicators, you want to look at the situation as a whole. So if someone has like a king's crown tattoo on them, that doesn't mean that they're a trafficker. Or if they are somebody that has an older person with them, that doesn't mean that they are being trafficked. You want to look at the totality of the circumstances, okay? So with that being said, minor that is not related to a non-age appropriate male or with an overly controlling boyfriend or another female. So they're talking for them. They're restricting their movements. If they're out in public, eyes are downcast, not looking around, and they're following that person very closely, and there's not a lot of space left between them. So they're very heavily controlled and being monitored by that individual. And that minor has somebody who is much older than them, and that person appears to be maybe very overly romantic with that individual, touching them in ways that you wouldn't see like an uncle or a grandfather touching them out in public. Possessions of large amounts of cash, prepaid cards, MoneyGrams, hotel key cards is a big one. So especially those who are doing a lot of traveling, even locals, because sometimes they don't want to be posting within and like doing the acts within their own home, so they'll go to the hotels. So they will have large amounts of hotel key cards stashed in their belongings in their purse. Those who are chronic runaways. Dramatic, unexplained changes in behavior or attire following new associations with unknown people. So if somebody usually dresses like very conservative, maybe very minimal makeup, all of a sudden they're showing up with like very expensive clothing, very expensive merchandise. They're really doing up their appearance. They've got a lot of things that they wouldn't usually couldn't afford. So that's something that we could see, especially with young adults, because where are they getting the money to pay for that? When I say young adults, I mean minors. Possessions of more than one cell phone. So I have 2 cell phones. Does anyone else have more than one? Okay, what do you all have more than one cell phone for? Work, yeah. Work and personal. A lot of these girls and guys it's for the same reason. They'll have 2 phones, one's for personal and then one's for work, where they post, where they respond to buyers or Johns, and where they communicate with their pimp or trafficker. A young person that is very hesitant to engage in conversation, eyes are always downcast, they avoiding eye contact, especially with men. And the reason for that being is, statistically, a lot of the traffickers are men, and their traffickers will tell them that you're not allowed to look at any other man except for me. If you do, I will beat you. So they're told not to look at anyone else, or they may also just not feel safe or comfortable looking at another man because their person that has been abusing them and has been selling them was a man. Poor physical state, so they're tired, they're malnourished, showing signs of abuse and torture. Seems to have trouble responding to what their name is or what location they are in. A lot of times we'll see victims who have their names changed frequently. They might have multiple IDs. They may go by different names. They might go by their posting names and their ads. Their traffickers might give them names because they don't want somebody identifying them later on. And they may not be able to tell you clearly where they're at or where they're going. They can't keep a straight story because they're being told to not tell anyone what's going on, what's happening to them. So they will answer minimally and try not to give out too much information. Also, when you're moving around from place to place to place, you're not really going to know where you're at after doing that for several months on end. Traffickers may use reproductive coercion, denying their victims access to condoms or birth control. The reason for this is because when you have a child, now they have something to control you with. And we see it quite often with some of our traffickers where even if that child doesn't belong to that trafficker or to a buyer, if they have children, young children especially, they will tell them, if you want your child to be safe, if you don't want your child to get hurt, you need to do this. You need to continue to do this. So if someone was to get pregnant and have a child, now they have something to continue to keep that person in that life. Unable to speak for themselves, male subject insisted on being with the female wherever she goes. Again, this doesn't have to be just male. This can be female too. There are female traffickers, or it can be the bottom. May refuse necessary care or are fearful of receiving the care due to pressure to return to work quickly. You see this a little bit more with like labor trafficking, but also when someone goes into the hospital, they have injuries and they are just really rushing to get out of there. They're saying that they need to get back to work. They don't want to answer a lot of questions. They don't want too many eyes on them, so they're trying to get out of there as quickly as possible. They're wearing clothes that don't fit the climate or the situation. So this is something would be much more noticeable up here in Montana because it's cold. And if you see somebody who is walking around with very short shorts, tank top, no jacket, nothing to cover them up, that raises a little bit of a red flag. Same thing goes for in the summer when it's really hot outside and they're wearing a long jacket covering up their arms, long sleeve clothing, pants. They could be covering up bruises, injuries that have been left on their body. So labor trafficking. So there's 2 main types of labor trafficking. We've got bonded labor and we've got forced labor. So with bonded labor, victims become bonded laborers when their labor is demanded as a means of repayment for a loan or service in which its terms and conditions have not been defined or in which the value of the victim's services as reasonably assessed is not applied toward the liquidation of the debt. This is where we see a lot of people who are coming in from being smuggled in, and they are being told that, you come in, you can make a lot of money at this job, you'll be able to you'll get a social security card, you'll get all the things that you need to meet your family's needs. You'll be able to make enough money to send back home to your family. A lot of times these people will give them like the deeds to their land or to like their properties. They get over here, they get handed over to the trafficker, and the trafficker is like, now you owe $30,000 for that, and you need to work at my business. So then they get stuck into this never-ending debt, never-ending loophole, where they are never able to get out of debt from that person, because no matter how much they work, they will never be out of debt. And then there is forced labor, which is a situation in which victims are forced to work against their own will, under the threat of violence or some other form of punishment. Their freedom is restricted, and a degree of ownership is exerted. So these are some of the places where it can occur. It's places that we also see a lot of here in Montana. So food industries, restaurants, hospitality industries, like those who are working as maids, or room service at hotels and motels, spas and nail salons, agriculture industry, and construction industry. We also see a lot like with the ranches too, and like the different properties out there. So with labor trafficking indicators, we see a lot of foreign nationals who are hired for employment, workers who are living on site. For example, when we are looking at illicit massage businesses, we will go in and they will live in the same building where they're providing those services. So there will be a cot right next to the, I need to stop touching that. There'll be a cot right next to the bed where they provide the massages, because sometimes these places will also give legitimate massages. I'm not saying that they're good massages, but they will provide that service on top of the other one. But they will live and sleep right next to where they give those services as well. They will eat, sleep. We've seen places where they were gardening right outside of the building. So they would grow their own things out there. So they are living on site. Workers are rarely seen off site. So if they're, like, for example, construction, they're there from 4 a.m. in the morning and they have not left until like 12 p.m. at night. They're rarely ever seen off site, and it's the same people. It's not a rotation of people. Overcrowded and inhumane living spaces, 12 people living in a 2-bedroom home. Now there are cultures, and there are like different cultures out there where large families do live, where there's a lot of people that do live under one roof. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about large groups of people who are not related to each other. They work at the same place, living in a very tight and confined area. So they will have very few personal items. A lot of it's been taken, or it's been thrown out. They're not allowed to have it. So they might have a few pairs of clothes, and they might have some hygiene items. Excessive payment for room, transportation, equipment, and other expenses. So with debt bondage especially, when they get here, and then they're told, like, now you owe all this money for me getting you here, you also have to pay $600 in rent a week. You also have to pay for the gas to get you to the workplace. You also have to pay anytime you need to use the laundry facility. You need to pay water for a bath. You need to pay for groceries, $200 a week. So all of those things line up, like, will add up. And they're paying for a small space in a corner of a room. There have been times where there have been victims in some of our cases where they were sleeping in the spot where the laundry was or they would sleep in one of the closets. Like, that was the space that they were given. So very small spaces and excessive payment for that. Low pay received and often garnished. So sometimes they won't even receive that pay because it's being garnished by their trafficker. The identification and personal documents are withheld, so it happens often, where their trafficker will take that, will take their passports, their visas, anything identifying to them, and hold on to it and keep it, because now they can't go anywhere without that, and they rely on those documents. Unsafe or hazardous conditions or lack of proper safety equipment. So we'll see a lot of times where like in construction companies where they don't have the right gear for safety. They don't have hard helmets, they don't have goggles, so that they don't have that, and what they do end up having, they have to pay for very high amount for it. Excessively long hours without a break. Workers transported as a group to and from housing and work sites. So we've had times where they're all living in one space. Then they all get moved into a van. That van takes them all to work. They get out. Then at the end of the day, they all get back into that van. So they get moved back and forth in that van. And then that's the only place that they go to. So if they need to go get groceries, if they need to go somewhere, they're all moving in that van together. They'll appear fearful, anxious, and restricted in what they say. So it can be very similar to what we're seeing with those who are being sex trafficked. Workplace has high security features such as opaque windows, bars, locks outside the doors. Now I know that there are some places where darkened windows and things like that are pretty normal, like bars and things like that. But I'm talking massage businesses. They having very darkened windows, cameras outside the doors and the windows, those locks outside the doors, because if you're a massage parlor business or a massage business, having to knock on the door and then being let in is not very common. Usually you can just kind of walk in. So saying that is a bit of a red flag. Goods or services are priced below the average market rates. Workers defer to another person before giving information or speaking because they're told not to talk. Also, sometimes, especially when we are looking at those who are undocumented, if they are Spanish speaking, they might have one person who speaks for all of them, so they refer to that one person, and that goes into the cycle of they now rely on that one individual to meet all of their needs, so they have to seek out that one person to speak for them. Unusual hours for businesses and or open outside of those posted business hours. So a lot of times we'll see with massage parlors, their hours are 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. or 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., but they still have customers knocking on their door at 10 p.m. and they're being let in. So if you're seeing that unusual activity outside those business hours, it's usually a little bit of a red flag. Owe money or insignificant debt with their employer, have untreated injuries, and are isolated and restricted from communicating with loved ones. Does anyone have any questions about any of those indicators? No? Okay. So just a little bit about this, continued presence. It is a program that we have here through Homeland Security. It's through the Blue campaign. No, it's just through Homeland Security. Blue campaign's different. But continued presence is a program where if we have somebody who is an undocumented immigrant and they are being trafficked, they've been identified as being a victim of trafficking, they can enter into this program where they can be here in the United States on a paroled status. The only caveat is that they have to work with law enforcement in the case. So they have to be a witness, and they have to, or at least provide information that would be supporting of that case. But if they're willing to do that, they get enrolled into this program where they can get here under a visa, and then that can be used to get their T visa. And usually in our unit, if we have somebody in this program, which we do have people that are part of this program, we'll get them connected with an attorney that helps them through that process. So it does help, especially because a lot of them fear coming forward and reporting the situation. And this does help a little bit with helping them feel a little more comfortable with with talking with us and reporting that information. Because we don't want those people who are exploiting them to continue exploiting them by using their immigration over their heads. So these are just some of the things that we're doing locally. So in 2019, they changed the definition of prostitution to include hand jobs and not just intercourse. And then we reformed some of our laws in 2023. We have some things that we're making some changes on when it comes to this next legislative session in 2027. And then my favorite one, they added a victim service specialist in 2023. So I've been here for 2 years, and it was a brand new role. But before that, they just had 2 agents covering the whole state of Montana. And then in 2023, they added me along with 1 other agent. And honestly, they need to add at least, and I'm not even kidding, they need to add at least 4 more to Montana. So these are some of the cases that we've seen over the years. In 2015, all the way up, this right here, so actually, sorry, first off, when we see these rise in cases, it's not because Montana's all of a sudden becoming like the hub of human trafficking. It's because people are becoming aware and getting training and understanding what human trafficking looks like. Okay, so when we talk about hidden in plain sight, it means that we are on a daily basis, you were probably interacted with or have seen somebody who has been who's being trafficked or has been trafficked, but we didn't recognize the signs. There will be times where there will be cases that have been seen by law enforcement, like local law enforcement, prosecutors who have cases in front of them and don't even realize that what they're looking at is human trafficking. And still to this day, and I'm not blaming any of them, I'm genuinely not. You cannot take action until you know what to look for, until you know what human trafficking is. So these numbers have continued to rise because people are becoming aware, people are reporting, people are starting to identify the trafficking cases around us. So that's why this number goes up. The reason this number in 2025 went down, again, it has nothing to do with because we have less cases. We had 2 agents that had switched out, so we had 2 that left, and then we hired 2 to replace them. So during 2025, we had just 1 agent and myself covering all of the cases for like 6 months. And then when they came in, they had, a training period. So that low number is because we just had pretty much 1 agent working at that for like half of the year. But that number will shoot back up this year because we've had a lot of cases. I want to say we probably have had about that many so far this year, and a lot of victims. And also to say that those numbers do not represent, that doesn't mean that is how many cases, how many human trafficking cases that we have in Montana. There are probably a lot more than that are happening because again, people are still learning, people are still identifying what trafficking looks like. We still have places in Montana where some of the local government and people that are in those communities are saying, not here, it doesn't happen here. It doesn't happen in Montana. Like they genuinely don't believe that human trafficking happens in the state. And also not every victim wants to report to law enforcement. And some of the data gets reported to local law enforcement, and it just doesn't come to our unit. And then these are just about the victims that we have seen. Again, this does not represent all victims across the state of Montana. There are victims who have not been identified because they either didn't self-identify or because they did not feel safe reporting to law enforcement. But in 2022, the reason why there's all of a sudden a change, and for those in the back, the blue is adult victims recovered, the orange are juvenile victims recovered, and the white or silver, gray, whatever color, is adult victims interviewed. So the reason that changed, why that was added, was in 2022, what they were doing was anytime they came into contact with the victim, anytime they identified a victim and interviewed that victim, they counted that as recovered. Is that really recovered though? No. So in 2022, they didn't feel like that was accurately being represented, so they changed it. So adult victims interviewed, if they came in contact with someone, they said, we don't want any kind of service, we don't want any kind of support, we want to be left alone. They just did the interviewed. The blue and the orange then changed to if we interacted with them, we spoke with them, we offered them services, they took them, we would count those as recovered. So that's when that data changed. And again, it doesn't represent all victims or all survivors that we've encountered. And a lot of times these victims end up going right back into the life. It takes 11 times for a victim to leave the life. 11 times for them to interact with law enforcement, 11 times for them to interact with the victim service specialist, an individual in their life, service providers. So it takes them 11 times on average. And I think like the domestic violence statistic is 7 times. So it takes a lot more for a victim of trafficking to leave. So what is needed now? You've learned what it looks like, I hope. You have gotten all the information, whether you are out in your job role, or out in public. What do you do now? First off, none of y'all are Liam Neeson, and none of y'all are law enforcement. I don't think. None of you are law enforcement, right? There's no law enforcement in here. Okay. So do not intervene. If you see someone who is showing indicators of being trafficked or a victim of trafficking, do not try to intervene or insert yourself, because you don't want to make that situation unsafe for that person and for you, because you don't know what that situation is. You don't know what's going on. If you were to try to intervene and talk to that person, they may feel like they may feel compelled to tell their trafficker that somebody had approached them, and that might lead to a beating. It might lead to more threats. So just for safety, that could be a very dangerous situation if you do try to help. Great intentions, just it's unstable and you don't know what would happen if you were to try to intervene. So what you can do instead is get down every detail you can, and every small detail. So if there's a vehicle, license plate, make, model, color of the car, if you can get a picture, if you can safely get a picture, if you're holding your phone up like this right in front of the trafficker's face, don't do that. But if you can discreetly take a picture or a video, and it's safe to do so, of that victim themselves too, do that. We have software where we can run facial recognition on victims and identify if they're posting ads. So if you have a picture of a victim's face like that, that can be helpful. Again, if you can legally do that, because I don't think you can do that like in private businesses, or that might be recording. Sorry, I'm talking about recording. But document as many details. If they're leaving somewhere, time, date, direction where they're leaving to helps. If you heard them mention that they are going to Bozeman, post, like, that's helpful too. Any description of that individual, both of them, if the person is with them who might be their trafficker, or somebody who might be exploiting them, any identifying details. If they have a tattoo, that's great. So details. Have those down. That helps more than you know. And then report as soon as possible. It helps, especially if you have seen something and it might, it's something that just kind of bothers you. It didn't sit right with you. If you sit on that for a week and then report it, at that time, that person might already be down in California posting if they're a traveler. They might be long gone. At that point, it can be a little bit harder to track them down and find them. So try to report it as soon as possible, because it does help with timing. If it's an emergency, so that person is actively being beaten in front of you, that person, or if it's a minor, if it's a child and it looks like that person, like there's a person who is holding them against their will, call 911. If it feels like something that needs response right now, right away, there's very clear indication that that person is being held against their will because they've got chains around their arms or ropes around their arms, or if they are asking for help, if they've approached you and said, I need help, call 911. And then if it's a situation where you saw it and you're like, that just didn't feel right, that seemed a little bit odd, like there were some things I noticed that points to human trafficking, like they might be getting trafficked, or if you go to a business and there's just some things that are off about that business and the workers there that you feel a little bit of concern, you can report it to the Montana hotline. So just so y'all know, right now Montana does have a hotline. It was being ran through a third-party agency before, so it was being ran through the lifeguard group, so a nonprofit organization before, which was great because it's helpful to have that. However, the problem is a lot of people thought that hotline went directly to us, that we had all access to those calls. We didn't. So if someone made a report to them, it was kind of at the discretion of the organization and what they shared, and they wouldn't purposely hold calls. It's just we didn't know everything being called in. Now we are taking over that hotline. So now the hotline will be monitored and handled by our unit. So if you make a call or if you file a report through the Montana hotline here in the next few weeks, it will come to us and come to our unit, so just so you know. But you can call the hotline, that 833-406-7867, or what we are also going to be doing, you can download this app. It's called Simply Report. It's like a gold yellow app, the icon's gold yellow with like a white square. It is ran through the Safe House Project, which is like a human trafficking organization that provides services and help like locate safe housing for victims. They run that, and then they will, if you go on the app, you can like do it like a chat, report what you're seeing, report your concerns, all the details that you found. It gets sent directly to our unit. We have like a dispatch system that it gets sent to, and we're able to immediately get notified of that report. So, and it's usually easier, especially if you're sitting right there in front of the individuals and you want to report something. You can pull the app open. It's very user friendly, and you can report it directly through there. And you don't have to make an account either. You can just pull up the chat. So it's really handy. Nationally, there's the Homeland Security Tip Line, National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and then there's the National Human Trafficking Hotline. This one is still ran by a nonprofit agency. So if you were to report to the national hotline, just know that might take time to get to us. We've had some cases that have taken a couple months to make it to us. And by that time, it just doesn't, like, the situation is far past what we can do anything with. Because it was someone that was being seen at, a truck stop. So just keep that in mind. It is a great resource, especially if you're trying to find like human trafficking resources, if you have somebody that needs safe housing or anything like that, or any kind of resource really, they are a great resource to use. So are there any questions about that piece? Okay. So just some things to think about. Again, I don't know what all of y'all do with your jobs and what y'all do in y'all's agencies, but one of the biggest things is when we are talking about human trafficking is identifying and recognizing what it looks like and how to respond, especially if you are in an agency where you might come across somebody who is a victim of trafficking. So I'm talking about like licensing, if there's any like building licensings or like code enforcement, I don't know, anything like that. Those would be essential, and identifying like procedural, creating procedures in response. So within your agency, if you are going to be doing if you do any kind of work with victims or potential victims, like vulnerable populations or businesses, think about what types of policies and procedures do you and your agency have in place when you're working with those victims or survivors of trafficking, or what procedures do you have for businesses that might have some red flags for trafficking? Trainings So besides this one, what trainings have been provided to you in your agency for awareness and education? It's helpful just to have ongoing trainings. There's some through the Blue Campaign, which is by Homeland Security. There's also some through the Yellowstone Human Trafficking Task Force. Evaluation, so what types of questions are you or staff using to screen for human trafficking? This may not apply to all of you or any of you really, but if you are working for a place where you do talk to people one-on-one or do a lot of like frontline work with potential victims, think about that. And then resources, what types of tools and resources do you and staff have prepared for victims and survivors? And then just lastly, so keep some of these things in mind when you are talking, interacting, or even just having the mindset of victims of trafficking. Survivors and victims, they may take time to open up or reveal that their trafficking situation due to a significant lack of trust. There have been victims that we've worked with where it's been years. We're even going into court and the case is being prosecuted, and they still don't identify themselves as a victim. They knew what happened to them was wrong, but they still don't identify themselves as a victim. They also may not still completely and fully trust law enforcement because they've, one, been told that if they were to report that they would get in trouble. They might have a history of being involved with law enforcement. They may have actually been picked up or prosecuted and been charged for a sex crime charge or for a drug-related charge. So there's a lot of lack of trust with law enforcement agencies or any kind of agency that has like a, I don't know what the word I'm thinking of, but they might have a fear of repercussions, so survivors may not want a police report filed due to fear instilled by their trafficker, or there's concern that they won't be believed. There's a lot of cases where the situation sounds something you would see in a movie, but it has happened to them, and they're concerned that no one would even believe them that this has happened to them, so they don't want to report. There is significant trauma bonding. I've had cases with some survivors who knew what happened to them was wrong. They knew that they were being trafficked. They were able to identify that. When we would get to the point of prosecution, they did not want to testify because, one, their trafficker may have had a child, they have a child, they felt empathy for that trafficker and didn't want that trafficker to be put in jail because their child, they didn't want to take that person away from the child. Because they might still love their trafficker, have a lot of care for their trafficker. So that trauma bond can be very strong and it can last for years. So they may protect that person. They may not speak ill of that person, and they may not ever want that person to be in trouble or reported. Again, this may not always apply to y'all, but I keep it up here just in case. But if you are talking to someone who might be a victim of trafficking, simplify your screening questions. They don't have to be complicated. Sometimes asking a person who shows indication of trafficking, just asking them simply, are you safe, is enough. Safety does look different to every person, but generally they know what that means, and they can be able to say that. Just asking, are you safe, is a very direct, simple question. And we've had times where we've asked that and they have said, no, I'm not. And we can build from there. And if they say no, then you can call 911. Importance of wraparound supports. So prioritizing resources, things that target those vulnerabilities of that victim is really important when we're talking about victims of trafficking. And it helps prevent them from going right back into the life that they were in before. So here's the hotline, if anyone needs that. And then these are just some of the resources that are out there. The Yellowstone Human Trafficking Task Force is a great resource. They have a lot of things on their websites. They have lists of victim advocates around the state, organizations that they work with that are like specific to human trafficking. They also have a lot of trainings. The Truckers Against Trafficking is also a really great resource. They do specifically target like education awareness programs around truckers and the travel industry, but they do have some really great programs and trainings that are out there that are online that you can register and do online. Yeah, and then just some of these other ones will have different resources on them. The HER campaign and the Worthy Ranch are out of Billings. The HER campaign provides safe housing and resources for survivors of trafficking, and that's specifically what they target and work on, are survivors of trafficking. I was going to say something else, but I think that's about it. Yeah. All right. So I went through, I think, quite a bit of information. Does anyone have any questions or anything? Wow. Usually I have at least a few more. Okay. Well, I did end y'all 11 minutes early. So what I'll do is I'll go back to that screen with the QR code. I'll be up here. I do have my business card